he saved her life in the storm. But an ancient Apache tradition changed everything. Rain fell heavily over the open plains, drenching the earth and turning the trails into thick, sticky mud. Dark clouds moved fast across the sky, pushed by a wind that howled like an angry beast. Trees bent under the force, their branches snapping with sudden cracks. The rancher, a tall man with weathered skin and a strong build, rode his horse slowly along the ridge. His hat was pulled low, and his coat clung to his shoulders, soaked from the storm. He had been checking his fences and livestock when he noticed movement ahead. Something small, running through the rain, struggling against the wind. It was a young woman, her figure barely visible through the sheets of rain. Her clothes were soaked, sticking to her body, and her hair plastered to her face. She stumbled repeatedly, trying to keep her balance on the slippery ground. Every few steps she nearly fell, reaching out blindly for something to hold on to. The rancher's instincts kicked in. He had seen storms like this before, had survived more than one dangerous situation on these plains, and he knew she wouldn't last long without help. He urged his horse forward, splashing through puddles and small streams that had formed along the path. The rain pelted his face, but he didn't stop. With every stride he could see her struggle more clearly. A sudden gust of wind made her lose her footing, and she fell to the ground, sliding dangerously close to a small creek swollen with rainwater. The water churned violently, and he could see the panic in her eyes as she tried to crawl to safety. Without thinking twice, he spurred his horse faster, leaping over small obstacles, mud flying from the hooves. He reached the creek just as she slipped again, this time nearly toppling into the rushing water. He jumped down from his horse, landing in the mud, and ran to her side. "Hold on, grab my hand!" he shouted over the roar of the wind and rain. Her fingers trembled as they reached out, brushing his hand before finally clasping it tightly. He pulled with all his strength, his boots sinking into the mud as he dragged her to firmer ground. When she finally stood, shivering and gasping for breath, he held her steady, making sure she wouldn't fall again. Her face was pale and her eyes wide with fear, but there was also relief shining through. She whispered a soft thank you, barely audible over the storm. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a small, reassuring smile. "We need to get you out of this rain before it gets worse." He looked around, spotting a small ridge, not far from them where the wind was slightly blocked by trees. He helped her to his horse, lifting her carefully as she wrapped her arms around his shoulders. The horse snorted and stomped nervously in the mud, but the rancher calmed it with a gentle touch and a firm voice. Slowly, carefully, he led them toward the ridge. Along the way, he noticed the woman's skill in keeping her balance despite the storm. She moved cautiously, yet she had a natural grace, a quiet strength that made him respect her even more. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, trying to start a conversation, though the rain made words difficult. She shook her head slightly, and he could see the mud in her hair and on her clothes. I was visiting my family," she said softly, her voice trembling from the cold. "I didn't expect the storm to come so quickly." He nodded. "Storms out here can turn fast. You're lucky I saw you when I did."
They continued on, and the creek behind them raged louder, spilling over its banks. The rancher led the horse carefully, choosing solid ground, his hands steady despite the wind.
She clung to him, not only for safety but also for reassurance. He noticed the fear in her eyes, and he felt a sense of responsibility he hadn't expected. This was not just about helping someone across a storm. It was about keeping her alive. Finally, they reached the small ridge, where a few trees provided some shelter. The rain was still falling, but the wind was less strong here, and they could take a brief moment to catch their breath. The woman sank to her knees in the mud, shivering violently. He knelt beside her, putting a firm hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be okay now," he said. "Let's get somewhere dry." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself, teeth chattering. The rancher looked around and saw a small cabin a few 100 feet away. It was old, with a sagging roof, but it would be dry and offer some protection until the storm passed. He helped her to her feet and guided her toward it, moving carefully through the slippery terrain. When they reached the cabin, he opened the door and ushered her inside. The warmth hit them both, a sharp contrast to the cold rain outside. She sank onto a chair, exhausted, and he set about starting a fire, rubbing sticks and kindling together until flames flickered to life. The light cast shadows across the small room, illuminating her tired, wet face. "You did well," he said, handing her a blanket. "You're stronger than you look." She accepted it with a small, grateful smile. I don't know what I would have done without you," she whispered. "You don't have to worry about that," he replied. "We're safe now." Stepped back and looked at the window, watching the storm continue outside. The wind rattled the boards, and the rain hammered against the roof. But inside the cabin, there was a quiet sense of safety. For a moment, the only sounds were the crackling fire and their breathing. After a while, the woman looked up at him. "You didn't have to come for me," she said. "You could have stayed out there, safe on your horse." He shook his head. "I couldn't. You were in danger. I've seen what storms like this can do. People get hurt, sometimes worse. I couldn't just leave you." There was a pause, and then she smiled faintly, a mix of relief and admiration. "Thank you," she said again, more firmly this time. He nodded, accepting it without words. There was something about her courage, about how she faced the storm even though she was alone, that stayed with him. He had rescued her, yes, but he also knew that she had survived because of her own determination, her own will to keep moving despite the fear. They sat together for a while, warming themselves by the fire. He offered her some dry clothes he had in his cabin, and she changed quickly, grateful for the comfort. Outside, the storm continued, but it no longer felt threatening. Inside, there was safety, and slowly, the tension of the past hour began to fade. The rancher finally sat down across from her, watching her wrap the blanket tightly around herself. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Huli," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm Thomas," he said, holding out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Huli." She took it, shaking it briefly. There was a sense of respect in that small gesture, an unspoken understanding forming between them. Despite the storm, despite the fear and danger, they had come through together. As the rain continued to fall outside, they talked quietly, sharing small stories about their lives. Thomas told her about his ranch, his days spent tending cattle, repairing fences, and riding across the plains. Huli shared stories of her family, of the traditions they held, and the lands she loved. There was a warmth in their conversation, a sense of connection that neither expected. By the time the storm began to lighten, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. The cabin smelled of wet wood and smoke, a comforting scent after the chaos of the storm. Huli sat quietly, watching the rain drip from the roof, and Thomas stood by the window, looking out at the wet, shining plains. For both of them, the memory of the storm would stay forever, not just as a test of nature's fury, but as the moment their paths crossed. He had saved her life, yes, but it was also the start of something neither of them fully understood yet. There was a bond, fragile and new, formed in the rain, forged by courage, trust, and a shared struggle to survive. As the sky slowly cleared, a faint light breaking through the clouds, Thomas turned to Huli. "You're safe now," he said again. "We'll figure out the rest together." Huli nodded, her eyes reflecting both relief and curiosity. She didn't know what the future held, only that in this moment she was alive, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure of it, and that was enough to start the journey. One that would change both of their lives in ways neither could imagine. The storm had passed, but the plains were still wet and glistening under the morning sun. Puddles reflected the sky, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire still lingered, and the smell of smoke and wet wood filled the small room. Huli sat quietly in a chair, wrapped in a dry blanket, her hair drying slowly at the edges. Thomas moved around the cabin, fetching water and preparing a small breakfast. He had seen many storms in his life, but this one had tested both his skill and courage. Seeing her safe now gave him a sense of relief he hadn't realized he needed.
"Would you like some breakfast?" he asked, setting a small bowl of porridge in front of her.
The steam rose from it, warming the chilly air. Ahuli nodded, her lips pressing into a small smile. Yes, thank you. She took a spoon, and with each bite her color returned. The storm had left her pale and tired, but as she ate, she began to regain her strength. Thomas watched her carefully, making sure she ate enough. He had seen people weak from exposure to storms before, and he knew it could take time to recover fully. As she finished her meal, she looked around the cabin. The walls were decorated simply, some old photographs, a few tools hanging neatly, and a shelf with jars of preserves.
You live here alone? She asked.
Thomas nodded. Mostly. My family is gone. Just me and the land now. I take care of the cattle, fix fences, and ride across the plains every day. It can be lonely, but the land keeps me busy. Ahuli's eyes reflected interest. It must be hard living so far from others. It has its moments, he admitted, but I like it. Peaceful mostly, but storms like yesterday remind me how unpredictable life can be. He paused and looked at her carefully. And sometimes people appear out of nowhere, reminding you that life isn't just about the land. Ahuli's eyes softened, and she looked down at her hands. I'm grateful you came for me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Thomas shrugged lightly. I just did what anyone would do. But inside he felt a growing respect for her. She had been strong, facing the storm alone until he arrived. Her courage impressed him. After breakfast, Thomas suggested they take a walk around the small clearing near the cabin. The air was fresh after the storm and the sunlight sparkled on wet leaves. Ahuli stood slowly, stretching her arms, her movements cautious at first. He offered his arm and she took it, leaning slightly for support. As they walked, Thomas asked about her family. Do you live far from here? Yes, she replied. My family has a home in the hills beyond the river. I came here for a short visit, but I didn't expect the storm to arrive so quickly. We've had rain before, but nothing like that. Thomas nodded. The plains can change fast. 1 minute it's calm. The next, the wind and rain can be fierce. You did well, keeping yourself upright. Many wouldn't have managed. I had to try. My grandmother always said that the land tests you, not to punish you, but to teach you. I think I was learning yesterday. Thomas looked at her with curiosity. Your grandmother? She taught you this? Yes, Ahuli said, her voice quiet but confident. She taught me about survival, about respecting the land, and about traditions that help keep people safe. Some are old, very old, passed down for generations. They guide us when danger comes. Thomas felt a deep respect for her knowledge. He had learned many lessons from life on the plains, but hers were different. They were tied to culture, to a history he could not fully know, but he could feel the importance in her words. They walked further into the clearing, and Ahuli began pointing out small details of the land. She showed him where the ground was soft and where water pooled after heavy rain. She explained which plants could help with minor injuries and which ones to avoid. Thomas listened carefully, impressed by her knowledge. He realized that she was not just brave in facing the storm. She was wise and skilled in ways that many people, even those who had lived on the plains all their lives, might not understand. Your knowledge is impressive, Thomas said. You know this land better than most.
Ahuli smiled a little shyly. I grew up learning.
My grandmother wanted me to understand the ways of our people, the ways of survival, and the ways of respect. It isn't just about the land, it's about understanding it, listening to it. Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of admiration. You've taught me something already, just in a few hours. As they returned to the cabin, the sun broke fully through the clouds and the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. Thomas prepared tea for both of them, and they sat quietly watching the water drip from the roof. The calm after the storm gave them a chance to reflect. Ahuli looked at him with a serious expression. I should tell you something, she began slowly. There is a tradition in my culture, an old one. When someone saves your life, it is a bond that carries meaning. It's not just gratitude, it is respect, and in some ways, it is a responsibility. Thomas raised his eyebrows, listening carefully.
I don't fully understand, but I respect that.
Can you explain? She nodded. It is something that has been passed down for generations. When someone saves your life, the Apache tradition says that the person who saved you deserves to be honored. There is a ceremony, a ritual. It doesn't happen for everyone, only in certain circumstances. And it carries a bond that is deeper than friendship, though it isn't like marriage or family. It's a recognition of the courage, the protection, and the respect between two people. Thomas felt a mix of curiosity and respect. I didn't know such traditions existed, but I want to understand it if you are willing to share it with me. Ahuli looked at him, eyes softening. But it is not something simple. It is not just words. It is actions. It is learning. It is honoring each other's lives. Then we will do it your way. I trust you. For the rest of the morning, they began preparing for what would come next. Ahuli explained small steps, teaching Thomas about respect for her culture, about listening to the land, and about the significance of the storm and his actions. Each lesson was small but meaningful. Thomas found himself learning not just about her traditions, but about life in a way he hadn't considered before. They shared stories of their childhoods, too. Thomas spoke of long days riding the plains, of tending cattle from dawn until dusk, of nights alone under the stars. Ahuli shared stories of her grandmother, of the elders in her community, and of the lessons passed down through generations. Despite the differences in their lives, they found common ground in resilience, courage, and respect for the world around them. By afternoon, the cabin had become a small haven. The rain had stopped completely, leaving a fresh scent of wet earth and grass. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the room, and the air carried a sense of peace. Thomas and Ahuli sat quietly, sipping tea and observing the calm outside. "You know," Thomas said, breaking the silence, "I never expected a storm like that yesterday, and I never expected to meet someone like you." Ahuli smiled gently. "Neither did I. But sometimes the land and the storm bring people together for reasons they don't understand immediately." He nodded, feeling a strange connection he couldn't yet explain. It was more than gratitude. It was the sense of having shared something rare, something that had changed both their lives, even in a short span of hours. As the day wore on, Ahuli prepared for the next step, the beginning of the tradition she had mentioned. She taught Thomas about the significance of observing certain gestures, the importance of respect in every action, and the meaning behind the small rituals. Thomas listened intently, determined to honor the trust and courage that had brought them together. By evening, they sat near the window, watching the plains shimmer in the golden light of the setting sun. The storm was gone, leaving only a quiet, reflective world. Thomas glanced at Ahuli and saw not just the young woman he had rescued, but a teacher, a guide, and a person whose life was intertwined with the land in ways he was only beginning to understand. For both of them, the memory of the storm was no longer just fear and danger. It was also the beginning of connection, trust, and mutual respect. They had survived together, learned from each other, and started a journey that would test not only their courage but their understanding of life, tradition, and the bonds that can form between people in the most unexpected circumstances. And as night fell, the cabin filled with the quiet warmth of firelight and the unspoken promise of a new day. They both understood that their lives had changed forever. The storm had passed, but its impact and the connection it created would stay with them far longer than the rain ever could. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm golden light across the wet grass. The storm had passed entirely, leaving the world washed clean and shimmering. Thomas stepped outside the cabin, taking in the quiet beauty of the land. The air smelled of fresh rain and earth, and birds were beginning to chirp softly in the trees. He felt a calmness he hadn't experienced in a long time, but today the calm carried a new weight. Ahuli had told him that the Apache tradition required more than words. It required understanding, respect, and participation. Ahuli joined him outside, carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. "This is for the preparation," she said quietly, her eyes serious but gentle. The tradition asks that we honor the land, the people who came before, and the person who saved my life. Every action matters. Thomas nodded, his hands brushing the wet grass as he followed her. I will do my best, he said. I want to understand it the right way. They walked together toward a small clearing near the edge of the woods, where the ground was level and the trees formed a natural circle. Ahuli set her bundle down and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a few simple items, some smooth stones, dried herbs, and a small woven cloth with patterns that seemed to tell a story. She explained each item to Thomas. The stones represent the earth and strength. The herbs are for cleansing and respect. The cloth is a symbol of life and connection. Together, they remind us of the bond created when someone saves another person's life. Thomas studied the items, feeling both awe and humility. These are powerful symbols, he said. I never knew a bond like this could be honored so carefully. It is about respect, understanding, and the life we share with the land and people. This tradition has guided my people for generations. Today, it will guide us. She began the first step of the preparation, placing the stones in a small circle and arranging the herbs around them. Thomas watched closely, noticing the care in her movements. She explained the reason behind every action, the order of the stones, the placement of the herbs, and the meaning behind each gesture. Every step had significance, and Thomas realized that he could not simply participate blindly. He had to understand and honor the meaning behind every action. When she finished arranging the items, Ahuli turned to him. Now, you will help. It is not enough to watch. You must place your hand on the stones, feel the earth beneath you, and understand that your actions yesterday were more than chance. They were courage, respect, and care. They created a bond. Thomas knelt beside the circle, placing his hands gently on the stones. He felt the cool, smooth surfaces beneath his fingers and the damp earth beneath his knees. He focused on the memory of the storm, the fear he had seen in her eyes, the rush of adrenaline as he pulled her from danger, and the relief that had come when she was safe. In that moment he felt the weight of responsibility, not as a burden but as a connection that tied their lives together. Ahuli guided him softly, teaching him the proper words to say, simple phrases of gratitude, respect, and acknowledgement. Thomas repeated them carefully, understanding that the meaning was more important than the sound. He spoke slowly, letting the words sink in, feeling their significance with every syllable. When the first part of the preparation was complete, Ahuli led Thomas to a small fire she had built. She placed the herbs in the flames, letting the smoke rise and fill the clearing. The smoke carries respect, she said. It reaches the spirits of our ancestors, letting them know that we honor the bond created by courage and care. You saved my life. Today, that act is recognized beyond words. Thomas watched the smoke curl upward, feeling a sense of awe. The ceremony was not something he fully understood yet, but he could feel its power. It was not about magic. It was about meaning, history, and respect. He realized that this tradition connected the past to the present, teaching lessons about humanity and the value of life. As the smoke rose, Ahuli asked Thomas to stand and join her in a small circle within the clearing. She guided him through a series of gestures, simple movements that symbolized protection, trust, and acknowledgement. Each motion was deliberate, and Thomas felt the weight of the tradition in his actions. He noticed that his focus was entirely on the moment, on Ahuli, and on the significance of what they were doing together. When the gestures were complete, Ahuli placed the small woven cloth in Thomas's hands. This is a symbol of the bond, she said softly. It represents life, connection, and respect. Keep it with you, not as possession, but as a reminder of courage, care, and the responsibility we share when someone's life is saved. Thomas took the cloth carefully, holding it with both hands. He felt a strange warmth, not from the fabric itself, but from the meaning it carried. It was a connection that went beyond words, beyond simple gratitude. It was a recognition of life and courage, a bond that tied him and Ahuli together in a way neither had expected. They sat together in the clearing for a while, watching the sun move slowly across the sky. The warmth of the day contrasted with the memory of the storm, and Thomas reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment, danger had threatened to take her from the world. The next, they were here, participating in a tradition that honored life and courage. Ahuli spoke softly, her voice carrying both strength and warmth. Many people do not understand these traditions. They see actions without meaning, gestures without history. But every step, every movement, every word has significance. Today you have learned more than you know. You have learned that life is fragile, courage is powerful, and respect is eternal. Thomas nodded, feeling the truth in her words.
I see that now. I never realized a single act could carry so much meaning.
I thought I was just helping, but it is more than that. It is about connection, trust, and honor. Ahuli smiled gently. Exactly. And now we continue the preparation. The tradition has more steps, each guiding us toward understanding and recognition. You will see that courage is not just in facing danger. It is in respect, learning, and commitment. The rest of the day was spent in quiet preparation. Ahuli taught Thomas about other rituals, how to move carefully, how to speak respectfully, and how to honor both the land and the people who had come before them. Thomas listened closely, asking questions when needed, and following her guidance with care. Each step deepened his understanding, not just of the tradition but of Ahuli herself, the wisdom, strength, and connection she carried from her heritage. As the afternoon turned to evening, the sky painted with shades of orange and pink, Thomas and Ahuli finished the day's preparation. They had arranged the stones, herbs, and cloth, performed the gestures, and shared words of respect and acknowledgement. The clearing now held a quiet energy, a sense of balance and connection that neither could fully explain, but both could feel. Ahuli looked at Thomas, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You have done well," she said. Not everyone would participate with such care. Not everyone would take the time to understand the meaning, to honor the bond. You have shown courage not only yesterday, but today as well. Thomas felt a sense of pride, tempered with humility. I only did what I thought was right, but you have taught me more than I expected. I understand now that saving a life is not only about the moment. It is about respect, understanding, and connection. They sat quietly for a while, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The land was calm, the storm a memory, and the bond between them had grown stronger. Thomas knew that tomorrow would bring the ceremony, the moment when the tradition would be fully honored. He felt a mix of anticipation and respect, ready to continue learning, participating, and honoring the connection that had begun in the storm. As night fell, stars appeared in the sky, shining brightly over the plains. Thomas and Ahuli returned to the cabin tired but fulfilled. The fire in the hearth provided warmth, and the small space felt peaceful after the intensity of the day. They shared a quiet meal, reflecting on the lessons learned and the significance of the tradition. Before resting for the night, Ahuli placed her hand gently on Thomas's shoulder. Tomorrow is important. The ceremony will show the bond in full. It is not only about recognition. It is about understanding, respect, and connection. You must continue to participate with your heart, not just your hands.
I understand. I will do my best.
As he lay down to rest, Thomas thought about the storm, about the courage it took to save Ahuli, and about the lessons she had taught him. He realized that life could change in an instant, but respect, honor, and connection could last forever. He fell asleep with a sense of calm, ready for what the next day would bring. The continuation of the tradition, the ceremony, and the deepening bond with Ahuli. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the plains, casting soft light across the wet grass. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth from the storm the day before. Thomas woke early, feeling both nervous and excited. Today would be the day of the ceremony, the moment when the Apache tradition would be fully honored. He dressed simply, careful not to disturb the preparations Ahuli had made the night before, and stepped outside to meet her. Ahuli was already in the clearing, arranging the stones, herbs, and woven cloth they had prepared. The light from the rising sun touched each item, making them glow softly. Her movements were calm and deliberate, each placement and gesture carrying meaning. Thomas watched quietly, remembering everything she had taught him about respect, balance, and the significance of every action. "Good morning," she said softly, turning to him. "Today is important." "Are you ready?" Thomas nodded, swallowing a small lump in his throat. "I am." "I will follow your guidance." She smiled, a mixture of warmth and seriousness. "Remember, this is not just about performing actions. It is about understanding, feeling, and honoring the bond that began in the storm. Every gesture, every word carries meaning. Move with care and respect." They began the ceremony in silence, walking together into the small circle they had created. Ahuli instructed Thomas to kneel first, placing his hands gently on the stones while feeling the cool earth beneath him. "Feel the strength of the land beneath you," she said. "It supports life, it supports courage, and it supports the bond we honor today." Thomas closed his eyes, pressing his palms against the stones. He remembered the storm, the fear in Ahuli's eyes, and the moment he had pulled her to safety. He felt the weight of that memory and the responsibility it carried. This was no longer just about survival. It was about respect, honor, and recognition of courage. Ahuli began to chant softly, her voice blending with the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Each word carried significance, connecting the ceremony to the generations before her. Thomas listened, allowing the rhythm of her voice to guide him. He repeated the phrases quietly when she instructed, focusing on the meaning behind the words rather than just their sound. The herbs they had gathered the previous day were placed in the small fire at the center of the circle. Smoke rose gently into the sky, curling around the clearing, carrying with it respect for life, for the land, and for the people who had come before. Ahuli explained that the smoke reached the spirits of the ancestors, letting them witness the bond created between the one who had saved a life and the one who had been saved. Thomas watched the smoke rise, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He realized that the ceremony was not about magic or superstition. It was about recognition, connection, and respect. It was a way to honor courage and life in a manner that words alone could not express. Ahuli handed him the woven cloth. "This represents the bond created between us. It is not possession. It is acknowledgement, respect, and responsibility. Treat it carefully, as you would treat life itself." Thomas took the cloth with both hands, feeling the weight of its meaning. He understood now that it was more than a symbol. It was a reminder of the courage, care, and trust that had begun in the storm. The cloth connected him to Ahuli, to the land, and to a tradition older than either of them. They moved through a series of gestures, each step deliberate and precise. Ahuli guided him, showing how to move respectfully, how to honor the bond, and how to recognize the significance of each action. Thomas followed carefully, feeling the power in the ceremony and the importance of every small movement. As the ceremony continued, Thomas began to understand something deeper. The bond was not only about gratitude, it was about connection, trust, and shared understanding. Saving a life had created a responsibility that extended beyond the moment. It was about honoring each other, respecting the land, and recognizing that courage and care have lasting significance. During a quiet moment, Ahuli placed her hand gently on Thomas's shoulder. "You have shown courage not only yesterday but today as well. Courage is not just in facing danger. It is in understanding, respect, and participation. You have done all of these." Thomas felt a deep sense of pride, mixed with humility. "I only did what I could," he said softly. "But you've taught me that saving a life is about more than action. It is about respect, understanding, and connection. I understand now, more than ever." The sun rose higher, illuminating the clearing with warm light. Birds sang in the trees, and the wind carried a soft whisper through the grass. Thomas and Ahuli completed the final gestures of the ceremony, standing side by side, hands on the woven cloth, eyes reflecting both the light of the sun and the meaning of the moment. Ahuli looked at Thomas, her expression calm but full of warmth. This ceremony marks the bond created in the storm. It honors life, courage, and respect. It is a recognition of what has passed and a promise of awareness for the future. Thomas nodded, understanding fully. He felt a connection to Ahuli, to her culture, and to the land itself. The ceremony had changed him, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet understanding of respect, trust, and human connection. As they packed up the stones, herbs, and cloth, Thomas realized how much he had learned. He had entered the clearing nervous and unsure, but he left with understanding, respect, and a bond that went beyond words. He looked at Ahuli, feeling admiration, gratitude, and something deeper he could not yet name. Ahuli smiled softly. "You have done well. Not everyone would participate with such care. Not everyone would honor the tradition fully. You have shown respect, understanding, and courage. That is the meaning of what we have done today." Thomas felt a quiet pride. "I will carry this with me," he said, "not as a symbol, but as a reminder of life, respect, and the responsibility that comes with courage." They walked back toward the cabin together, the ceremony behind them but its impact lingering in every step. Thomas noticed the way the land seemed calmer, almost respectful of what had taken place. He realized that the bond was not just between him and Ahuli. It extended to the world around them, connecting them to the land, the sky, and the generations who had come before. Inside the cabin, they sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the day. Thomas could see the significance of the ceremony in every detail, the careful movements, the words spoken, and the connection formed. He understood that this tradition was not about obligation, but about recognition, learning, and respect. Ahuli spoke softly. "Today has shown that courage and care are not fleeting. They create bonds that last, that teach, and that guide. You have honored life, and that is a rare gift." Thomas nodded, feeling the truth in her words.
I never realized a single act could carry so much meaning. I thought I was just helping, but it is more than that.
It is about understanding, respect, and human connection.
The evening settled quietly over the cabin, stars beginning to appear in the sky.
The plain stretched endlessly beyond, calm and peaceful. Thomas and Ahuli shared a simple meal, the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the night surrounding them. They did not need many words. The experience of the day had spoken more clearly than any conversation could. As night deepened, Thomas reflected on the storm, the rescue, and the ceremony. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that courage, respect, and connection had a power far greater than he had ever imagined. The storm had brought them together, but the ceremony had given that meeting meaning and depth. Ahuli sat beside him, quiet but attentive. "Tomorrow, life will continue," she said softly. "But we will carry the bond with us. It is not something that ends with the ceremony. It is a guide, a reminder, and a connection that lasts." Thomas nodded, understanding fully.
"I will honor it," he said, "not because I have to, but because I want to."
"It has changed the way I see courage, life, and respect." The fire burned low, the cabin warm and safe, and the plains outside were calm and shining under the moonlight. Both Thomas and Ahuli felt a quiet peace, knowing that the storm had passed, the bond had been honored, and the tradition had taught them lessons that would last a lifetime. As they prepared to rest, Thomas glanced at Ahuli and saw not just the young woman he had saved, but a teacher, a guide, and a companion whose wisdom and courage had reshaped his understanding of life. The ceremony had done more than honor the bond. They had both grown, learned, and connected in a way that could never be forgotten. And as they drifted into sleep, the night held a promise. The storm was gone, but the connection it created would endure forever, guiding their steps, shaping their choices, and reminding them of the courage, respect, and care that had brought them together. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the land.
The storm that had once brought fear and chaos was now a memory, leaving behind a calm, shining world.
The air smelled of earth and rain, and a soft breeze whispered through the trees. Thomas stepped outside the cabin, feeling the warmth of the sun on his shoulders. Today, life would continue, but everything felt different. The bond formed during the storm and honored in the ceremony lingered, shaping his thoughts and his heart in ways he had never expected. Ahuli joined him, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked calm and confident, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. Thomas noticed the subtle strength in her movements, the same strength that had guided them through the storm and through the ceremony. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Ahuli smiled gently. "I am well. The storm is gone, and so much has changed. Not in the world around us, but in us. The bond, the tradition. It carries meaning beyond what we see." Thomas nodded, understanding. "I feel it too. Life feels different, but in a good way. The ceremony, the lessons, everything, it has stayed with me." They walked together toward the edge of the clearing, the earth soft beneath their feet. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with wildflowers, and the occasional tree swaying in the gentle wind. Thomas felt a sense of peace here, a quiet awareness that life was both fragile and beautiful. Every step reminded him of the storm, the rescue, and the ceremony. Then he realized that courage was not only in action, but in understanding, in respect, and in care. Ahuli led him to a small stream that ran nearby. The water was clear and cool, reflecting the sky above. She knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, and motioned for Thomas to do the same. He followed, feeling the refreshing water flow over his palms. "The land gives us life," Ahuli said softly, "and when we honor it, it gives back." The storm showed danger, but it also reminded us of the strength of life and connection. Thomas nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He looked at her, noticing how her eyes seemed to hold generations of wisdom. "You've taught me more than I ever expected," he said. "Not just about tradition, but about life itself."
Ahuli smiled faintly. "And you have shown courage and care."
That is the other part of learning, living what we are taught. Today, life continues, but the lessons remain. They spent the morning walking through the plains, checking the land and observing the changes left by the storm. Trees had been bent or broken, small streams had swelled, and the earth was damp and rich. Thomas showed her his ranch, pointing out fences, cattle, and areas where the land needed care. Ahuli moved with ease, offering suggestions on which plants could be used for small remedies or which areas would need extra attention. Thomas was impressed by her knowledge, not just of survival, but of understanding the land deeply. As they worked, their conversation grew lighter, filled with laughter and stories. Thomas told Ahuli about his childhood, long days riding the plains, and the quiet nights under the stars. Ahuli shared tales from her family, the lessons passed down by elders, and stories of courage and resilience from her people. Despite their different lives, they found common ground in the values of respect, courage, and care. By midday, they returned to the cabin for a simple meal. The fire was warm, and the air smelled of cooked vegetables and herbs. They ate quietly, each lost in thought but comfortable in each other's presence. Thomas looked at Ahuli, realizing how much her presence had changed him, not through grand gestures, but through her wisdom, courage, and connection to life. After lunch, Ahuli suggested they visit the ridge where the storm had begun. Thomas agreed, feeling a sense of reverence as they approached the spot. The creek was calm now, the muddy water replaced with gentle ripples, and the trees had straightened after the storm. He remembered the fear in Ahuli's eyes, the urgency of the rescue, and the relief when she had been safe. Standing here now, he understood how fragile life could be and how strong bonds could grow from shared experiences. Ahuli knelt near the creek, placing her hands on the earth. "This is where courage met respect," she said. "This land witnessed the bond we formed. It carries the memory of life saved and lessons learned. Every time you return, remember this moment." Thomas knelt beside her, placing his hand on the earth as well. He felt the cool soil, the gentle current of the creek, and the quiet power of the land. "I will remember," he said. "Not just the storm, but everything that followed, the lessons, the tradition, and the bond. It has changed me." Ahuli smiled, her eyes reflecting pride and warmth. Change is part of life. The storm showed danger, but it also showed what is meaningful. Respect, courage, care. They shape who we are and how we live. They sat together for a while, quietly reflecting on the journey. The storm, the rescue, and the ceremony had taught them both about life, responsibility, and connection. Thomas realized that bravery was not just about facing danger. It was about listening, learning, and respecting life in all its forms. Ahuli understood that the bond created through courage and tradition could guide and protect them in the days to come. As the afternoon light softened, Thomas and Ahuli returned to the cabin to rest. The plains outside were calm, and the air carried the faint scent of flowers and grass. They sat together by the fire, drinking tea and speaking softly about the future. Thomas felt a quiet determination. He would honor the bond and continue to learn, not only about the tradition but about life, courage, and respect. Ahuli placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Life will continue as it always does," she said. "But the bond we share, the lessons of the storm and ceremony, will guide you. Remember, courage and care are not just for a moment. They are for every day."
Thomas nodded, feeling the truth of her words.
I understand. I will carry it with me, not as a duty, but as a part of who I am now.
"You've taught me more than I can express in words." The evening fell slowly, stars beginning to appear in the sky. Thomas and Ahuli stepped outside, watching the plains stretch endlessly before them. The land was calm, the storm a distant memory, but its impact remained. It had created a bond, taught lessons, and changed their lives forever. As night deepened, they returned to the cabin, preparing for rest. Thomas felt a sense of gratitude for the storm, for the courage it had demanded, and for the bond it had created. He realized that life was full of unexpected challenges, but also of opportunities for connection, understanding, and growth. Ahuli settled beside him, quiet and calm. "Tomorrow will bring ordinary life again," she said softly. "But we will carry the lessons, the bond and the respect with us. It will guide every choice, every action, every step." Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "I will honor it, not because I must, but because I want to. It has changed the way I see life, courage, and respect." As they drifted into sleep, the cabin warm and safe, Thomas reflected on the journey. The storm had brought danger, but it had also brought him to Ahuli, taught him lessons, and created a bond that would last forever. The ceremony had honored that bond, and life would continue with understanding, care, and respect guiding their steps. The plains were quiet under the moonlight, the night serene and calm. Thomas and Ahuli rested, knowing that the storm had passed, but the connection it created would endure. It would guide them, remind them of courage and care, and shape their lives in ways they could not yet fully understand. The next day they woke to a bright, clear morning. The plains were alive with light, wind, and sound, and the land seemed to hum with quiet energy. Thomas and Ahuli prepared to continue their daily routines, but with a sense of meaning and awareness that had not existed before. The lessons of the storm, the ceremony, and the bond remained, guiding their actions and decisions. They worked together on the ranch, tending cattle, repairing fences, and moving through the land with careful observation. Every action was measured, thoughtful, and respectful. Thomas found himself thinking about the lessons Ahuli had taught him, the value of patience, the importance of observation, and the power of respect for life and tradition. Ahuli moved with ease across the plains, her knowledge of the land evident in every step. She taught Thomas new ways to observe the environment, how to notice changes in the wind, water, and plants, and how to respond with care and understanding. Thomas listened, learning not just from words but from example, appreciating her wisdom and skill. As the day ended, they returned to the cabin, tired but fulfilled. The fire warmed the room, and the air carried the scent of herbs and cooked food. They shared a simple meal, speaking softly about the day and reflecting on the lessons learned. Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the storm and the rescue, but for the bond and understanding that had grown between them. Ahuli placed her hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "Life will continue," she said. "But the bond, the lessons, and the respect will remain. They will guide us, protect us, and remind us of courage and care." Thomas nodded, feeling the depth of her words. "I will remember. I will honor it every day." The night settled over the plains, stars shining brightly above. Thomas and Ahuli sat quietly, listening to the soft rustle of the wind and the distant call of a night bird. They understood that the storm had changed everything, not through destruction, but through connection, respect, and courage. As they drifted into sleep, the cabin was warm and safe, the plains calm and peaceful. The storm had passed, but the bond it created would endure. It would guide their actions, shape their choices, and remind them of the courage, care, and respect that had brought them together.